My name is Rowena Greaves. I'm 84 years old. And last month, I buried the only man who ever truly knew how to love me. My husband, Clarence. We were married for 56 years. Raised 2 children. Built our life in a modest white house on the edge of Thatcher County, Georgia, where the summers are long and the neighbors always talk too much. Clarence passed on a Tuesday. Quiet, peaceful, holding my hand just like he said he would. But our son, he wasn't there. He hadn't been there for months. Not during Clarence's chemo appointments. Not during the late-night ambulance runs. Not when his lungs filled with fluid and I sat up for 3 days straight holding a spoonful of water to his lips. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. His name is Trevor. And the last time he visited his father, he stood in our doorway, arms crossed, saying things like, "Dad never understood me. He always made me feel like a failure." I stood there, biting my tongue until I tasted copper. Because Clarence gave that boy everything. Paid for his out-of-state college. Co-signed on a mortgage. Lent him money that never came back. Raised him through fevers, heartbreaks, failed businesses, and one particularly disastrous second marriage. And still, Trevor called him controlling, entitled, old-fashioned. He left that day without saying goodbye. Clarence never said it out loud, but I knew it broke something in him. He stopped asking if Trevor would call. Stopped checking the mailbox for cards. But I saw the way his eyes lingered on family photos. The way he kept a voicemail from Trevor saved on the answering machine, even though it was from 3 years ago. I did what I could to soften the ache. But some kinds of silence sit in a man's chest until they turn it cold. When Clarence died, I called Trevor. The line rang 5 times before his voicemail picked up. I left a message. Your father's gone. He didn't call back. Not that day. Not the next. Not even for the funeral. He didn't show. But 5 days later I got a text message at 2:17 in the afternoon. "Hey Mom. Sorry about everything. Just wondering when we can talk about the will." No apology. No mention of his father's name. Just the will. The inheritance. I stared at that message for a full 10 minutes. Then I walked into the study, opened the fireproof safe, and pulled out the document I'd prepared 2 months before Clarence died. The will. It was short, precise. And on the final page, in clear black ink, Trevor's name was there. Crossed out. Clarence had made the decision himself, after Trevor missed his 79th birthday, then sent a text 4 days later saying he'd been swamped. It had broken him. But it had also woken him up. He looked me in the eye one morning, frail and sunken, and said, "I want to leave what matters to the people who were here when I mattered." So we called our lawyer. Made it official. Trevor was written out. Clarence gave his tools to our grandson Elijah. His truck to our niece. The house, the savings, the land. All to me. 'Cause I stayed. 'Cause I loved him. Because I held him through his last breath. And now that will sat in my lap, silent and powerful. My phone buzzed again. Another text. "It's only fair, Mom. I know you're grieving, but Dad would have wanted me taken care of too. I'm his son." I stood up. Walked to the dining table. Laid the will out flat. Took a photo. Then I wrote a note on the back of a recipe card. 5 words. "You already got what you deserved." I slipped the photo and card into an envelope. Addressed it. Dropped it in the mailbox the next morning with a steady hand. And when the flag went up, I didn't feel petty. felt free. But I knew Trevor wouldn't let it end there. Because sons like him never do. And I was right. 3 days later I saw his car pull up. He wasn't coming to apologize. He was coming to fight. If this moment pulled at your heart, or made you feel like finally standing up for yourself, go ahead and like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe. Before the yelling, before the will, before the silence, there was a little boy who used to call his father my hero. Trevor wasn't always like this. He was a bright child. Thoughtful even. I remember the way he used to follow Clarence around our backyard like a shadow with legs, helping him dig garden beds, hand him tools, or sit on the porch while Clarence tuned his old radio. He adored his father. And Clarence. He loved that boy with a kind of fierceness I used to envy. He coached Little League, built a treehouse in the yard from scratch, taught Trevor how to drive in the church parking lot every Sunday after service. He gave him the kind of presents most boys only dream about. But as Trevor grew, something hardened in him. By 15, every suggestion Clarence made was an attack. Every gesture of help was seen as control. I remember one night at dinner, Clarence offered to proofread Trevor's college application essay. Trevor pushed his plate back and snapped, "I'm not your project." Clarence didn't say a word. Just folded his napkin and walked out to the garage. I found him an hour later sitting in his old recliner, eyes rimmed red. He said nothing, but I knew what it meant. You raise them to fly, and sometimes they circle back with talons. The more we gave Trevor, the less he seemed to value it. When he got into a good school out of state, we were overjoyed, until we found out 2 years in that he dropped out without telling us. He said he wasn't inspired. Said college wasn't his path. So Clarence paid off the debt anyway. Helped him start a small landscaping business. Even gave him the truck Clarence had driven for 20 years. Trevor called it a rust bucket. Sold it 6 weeks later and used the cash for a vacation with his then girlfriend. When Clarence found out, he didn't yell. He just got real quiet. That's when I first noticed the change. The disappointment didn't show up in loud moments. It showed up in the silences. Clarence stopped asking Trevor about his plans. Stopped suggesting anything. He'd just nod along, then sigh when the phone call ended. But still he loved that boy. Still tried. Even when Trevor married Corey, his second wife, and made it clear she had no interest in old people drama. Even when visits got shorter and phone calls turned into missed texts. Even when Trevor only came around on birthdays if there was a check involved. We got used to his absence like people get used to a missing tooth. You never forget it's gone, but eventually, you stop running your tongue over the empty space. And then Clarence got sick. First it was just fatigue. Then confusion. Then the diagnosis, pancreatic cancer. We told Trevor right away. I remember the conversation vividly, because it was the last time I heard Clarence try to beg for someone's time. "Trevor," he said, voice raspy on speakerphone, "I want to see you. Just once." Trevor said he'd check his schedule. He never came. When Clarence entered hospice care, I called again. Trevor texted back 2 days later. "Tell Dad I'll see him when things calm down on my end. It's a lot right now." Clarence didn't even ask again. He knew. He knew that boy he raised, the one who once drew him crayon pictures and called him Superman, wasn't coming back. I watched my husband take his last breath with no son at his bedside. Just me. Just our neighbor Beatrice holding my shoulder. Just the hum of the oxygen machine and the quiet creak of a rocking chair in the corner. The funeral came and went. People brought casseroles, hugged too tight, told me Clarence was in a better place. Smiled. Nodded. But inside I felt something else growing. Not rage. Not bitterness. Something colder. Resolve. Because for too long, Trevor's neglect had been treated like an inconvenience, something we tiptoed around. Not anymore. He didn't get to show up after death when he couldn't be bothered to show up in life. So when that car pulled into the driveway 3 days after I sent him the will, I didn't feel nervous. Felt ready. He walked up the porch like he had a right to be there. Khakis. Polo shirt. Sunglasses like he was hiding from something. He didn't knock. Just stood there. I opened the door, arms crossed. "Got your message," he said, voice flat. "Real classy. That's the word you're going with." I replied. "Classy." He sighed. "Look, Mom. I know things got messy, but I'm still family. I deserve something." I stepped out onto the porch, let the screen door shut behind me. "You want something?" "Yes." "Something for what?" "For ignoring your father's pain. For skipping his funeral." He narrowed his eyes. I had things going on. I didn't think he'd go that fast. "You didn't think he'd go at all," I said quietly. "You thought he'd wait forever for you. But life doesn't work like that." Trevor rubbed the back of his neck, frustration rising. "I'm his only son." He nodded. "You were." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means what it means," I said. "Clarence chose who mattered to him before he died. And it wasn't the person who ghosted him while he wasted away." "You're bitter." "No," I said. "I'm awake." Turned open the door. "He left you behind, Trevor. And now I am too." Then I walked back inside. Left him on the porch with nothing but silence and his own reflection in the glass. If this moment stirred something in you, if you've ever watched someone betray the very hands that raised them, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Trevor didn't come back after that porch confrontation. At least not right away. But 2 days later I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Just my name in that impatient, all caps handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. Inside was a single sheet of printer paper. Not signed. "You and Dad always made me feel like nothing I did was good enough. So I stopped trying. Maybe if you hadn't pushed so hard, I'd have come around. Maybe if he'd just accepted me as I was, I'd have been there. But instead you both turned your backs. Now you're punishing me. Erasing me. Enjoy what's left." I folded the letter neatly, placed it in the kitchen drawer next to the unpaid bills and warranty receipts. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Because the real grief had already come and gone with Clarence. This was just the echo of a hollow man trying to make noise in a house where no one was listening anymore. But Trevor was wrong. We never turned our backs. We waited. Too long. I thought about the time Clarence offered to help Trevor buy his first home, loaned him $20,000 from the retirement savings we'd worked 30 years to build. We never got it back. Not a dime. And we never asked for it either. Clarence used to say, "He'll pay it back in love." But love never came. Not even when we lost our granddaughter in that awful accident. 12 years old. Our sweet Sylvia, taken by a drunk driver just 2 blocks from her home. We called Trevor to tell him. He didn't answer. When he finally called back 2 days later, he said, "I didn't know what to say." And then he never said anything else. We grieved without him. We buried our only grandchild with just a dozen people around the grave. Clarence placed a daisy on her casket with trembling hands. Trevor didn't even send flowers. That was when something in Clarence changed for good. He didn't stop loving Trevor, but he stopped believing in him. So when we updated the will last spring, Clarence was calm. Steady. He made no apology, just handed the signed copy to our lawyer and said, "I've given him every chance. Now I give him the lesson." It wasn't about revenge. It was about honesty. Because when a man builds something his whole life, a marriage, a home, a legacy, he wants it to go to people who will protect it, not plunder it. That legacy is what Clarence worked for. It was in the tools hung in perfect rows in the garage. In the fishing rods he taught our grandson Elijah to use. In the handwritten notes tucked inside books in his study. In the cracked front porch swing where he proposed to me one July night under lightning bugs and moonlight. Trevor didn't want that legacy. He wanted a check. But money runs out. Legacy lives on. And I was determined to protect it. So I called Elijah. Told him to come by. He was 30 now, married, with 2 toddlers and a job at the local middle school as a history teacher. When he walked in, his eyes still looked like his grandfather's, curious, kind, and sharp. We sat at the kitchen table. I placed the letter from Trevor in front of him. He read it. Didn't say a word for a long time. Then he asked, "Do you ever regret it, Grandma? Cutting him out?" I looked out the window at the garden Clarence and I had built together. "No," I said. "Not anymore." Elijah nodded. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. "I found this in one of Grandpa's fishing tackle boxes," he said. "It's full of advice. Memories, stories." He wrote it for me. For when I got older. I took the notebook into my hands, and my heart nearly gave out. On the inside cover was Clarence's handwriting. To Elijah. My legacy isn't in what I built. It's in who I trusted to carry it forward. Make me proud. I felt the tears come then. Not from sadness. From release. Trevor had been so focused on what he was owed. He missed what was freely offered. Love, time, wisdom. He wanted the bank account. But Clarence had already given the treasure to someone else. Elijah closed the notebook, looked at me. "I'm going to frame this page," he said. "Put it in my classroom." That was the moment I knew Clarence's legacy was safe. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to hide anything anymore. Not the truth. Not the pain. Not the strength it took to say no to a son I once would have bled for. So I wrote my own letter. To Trevor. This time in my handwriting. Not for apology. Not for peace. But for closure. You were given a lifetime of love and second chances. You chose distance. You chose silence. And now the silence remains. Your father left behind more than a will. He left a message. And you never stayed long enough to hear it. Goodbye, Trevor. The door you walked out of will not open again. He sealed it. Sent it. And this time I didn't check the mailbox for a reply. Because when you choose to stop chasing people who never looked back, you find peace waiting for you in your own reflection. If this moment stirred something deep, if you've ever had to guard a loved one's legacy from those who only show up with empty hands, please like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. It's strange how quiet a house becomes after the final goodbye. First, it was unbearable. I would catch myself listening for Clarence's cough from the hallway, the clink of his spoon in the teacup, the squeak of his boots on the porch. Grief played tricks on me in the smallest ways. But over time the silence changed. Stopped being heavy. Became sacred. I filled it with purpose. Mornings started with a walk through the garden Clarence built with his bare hands. Tomatoes ripened along the fence. His favorite birdhouse, the one painted blue by our granddaughter Sylvia before she passed, still hung from the maple tree. I'd sit there with a mug of tea and read a chapter from one of his old books, aloud, just so his words would live in the air again. I wasn't waiting for Trevor anymore. I had finally stopped living for the hope that he'd turn around. And wouldn't you know, the moment you stop waiting, they start watching. Trevor didn't send another letter after I returned his last one. But I knew he saw the message. Knew he read every word. Because a week later, Beatrice from 2 streets over called me. "Rowena," she said, "your son was sitting in his car down the road this morning. Just sitting. For nearly an hour." I peeked out the window later that day. His car was gone. But there were tire tracks on the edge of my lawn. The same tracks Clarence used to leave when he came back from fishing trips. Trevor was circling the past. But he wasn't invited inside. Not anymore. Instead, I focused on building something forward. I started teaching a memoir class at the local library. Every Wednesday, I sat in a circle with 8 other women. Widows, grandmothers, one brave soul going through a divorce after 42 years, and we wrote our lives out on paper. Paragraph by paragraph. Pain by pain. We laughed. We cried. We told stories no one else had ever heard. And in every story was a woman who had been forgotten, overlooked, used, or silenced. Till now. I told them about Clarence. About the garden, about Trevor, and about the will. First they gasped. Then one of them, a soft-spoken woman named Jeanette, leaned forward and whispered, "You did what the rest of us dream of." It hit me like a wind through an open door. This wasn't just about a will or a letter. It was about reclaiming the narrative. It was about finally standing in the truth and saying, "You don't get to define me anymore." One afternoon, Elijah stopped by with his kids. They ran through the yard, barefoot and wild, just like their daddy had once done. He brought a frame. Inside it was a photo of Clarence holding baby Sylvia on his lap, both of them smiling up at the camera like nothing else in the world mattered. Beneath it, he'd printed the words, "Legacy is what you leave behind when love refuses to quit." I hung it in the hallway, right beside our wedding portrait. That night, I wrote Clarence a letter. I do that sometimes. Fold it up and place it under his old toolbox in the garage. "Dear Clarence, the boy you raised didn't show up for you, but the man you raised in our grandson, he did. And he's teaching his children to love louder, to stay longer, to never disappear when life gets hard. You weren't forgotten. You were remembered in the best way. I miss you every day. Love. Row." The next morning I received a delivery. No card. Just a small wooden box on the porch. Inside was one of Clarence's old fishing lures. An antique one, silver, with a green stripe down the middle, and a note in handwriting I hadn't seen in decades. "I kept this. All these years. I'm sorry I didn't know how to come home." No name. But I knew. Trevor wasn't asking to come in. He was mourning what he'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, beginning to understand it wasn't mine to give back. It had already been passed on. To someone who never left. And that's the thing about inheritance. It isn't money. It's presence. It's memory. It's who sat beside you when the world went quiet. And who never made you beg for love. If this moment touched your soul, if you've ever chosen peace over permission, healing over history, click the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. I always thought justice would feel loud. Confrontation. A door slammed. A speech shouted into a silence that didn't know how to reply. But real justice, real peace, it's quiet. Like a garden waking up at dawn. Like an old woman sitting on her porch, tea in hand, watching a world that once dismissed her now revolve without her having to explain a thing. The last time I saw Trevor, he didn't know I saw him. It was just after church on a Sunday. I was walking through the cemetery behind the chapel, placing flowers on Clarence's grave, same as I did every week. The sun was warm and the birds were out, sounding more alive than I felt. I was just smoothing the grass when I heard a car door gently close. I looked up. Across the street, half hidden behind a tree, was Trevor's car. He stood by the edge of the lot, hands in his pockets, staring at the cemetery gate. He didn't come in. He didn't call out. He didn't even move when I looked right at him. He just stood there, like a boy at the edge of a river too wide to cross. And I knew in that moment, he finally understood. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the house or the tools or the checking account. It was about the inheritance he'd already squandered. Presence. Memory. And now. The door wasn't just closed. It was gone. He drove off without a word. And for the first time, I didn't feel a flicker of hope or guilt. Felt gratitude. Because I was finally standing in a life built on my terms. Later that week, I gathered Clarence's journals, the ones he never let anyone read. He always said they were just scribbles. Turns out they were so much more. Letters to me. Notes for Elijah. Stories about Trevor, Sylvia, his first job, his last fishing trip. Dreams. Love poured out in ink. I spent 2 months transcribing them. And then I printed them. Bound them into a simple book with a linen cover. I titled it, The Man Who Stayed. We held a small gathering in the library on the 1-year anniversary of Clarence's passing. Friends came. Neighbors. My writing group. Elijah brought his students. My niece sang a hymn. And I stood in front of everyone, trembling but sure. I read the final entry from Clarence's journal out loud. If I could leave anything behind, it wouldn't be money. It would be the proof that I loved and that I was loved back. That's the kind of wealth no one can steal, no one can fake, and no one can inherit by birthright. Only by being present. The room was silent. Not a heavy silence. Holy One. After the reading, Elijah came up to me, eyes glassy. You know, he said, one day I'm going to hand this book to my kids and say, this is the kind of man your great-grandfather was. And this is the kind of woman your great-grandmother became. I hugged him tight. And I whispered, that's all the legacy I ever wanted. A few days later, I received one more letter. From Trevor. I could tell by the handwriting he'd finally put pen to paper himself. No email, no typing, no cold detachment. I've been angry at Dad for a long time. But I think what I was really angry at was myself. For disappearing. For always feeling like I wasn't enough. And then proving it by walking away. I saw the book. I didn't know he kept all that. I didn't know you kept all of it alive. I know I'm not in your life anymore. I won't ask to be. I just wanted you to know I read every page. And I cried. For what I lost. And for what you still have. Take care of yourself. I'm trying to do the same. I folded the letter once. placed it inside the back cover of Clarence's journal. It didn't change the past. It didn't restore what was already gone. But it was a marker of something shifting, not between us, but inside him. I didn't reply, because the book already had. And the legacy was already spoken for. Now I spend my days in the garden, writing, teaching, laughing, remembering Clarence with joy, not ache. The will is settled. The past is at rest. And Trevor, he'll live with the choices he made. But me, I'll live with the love I preserved. And the life I finally claimed for myself. Quietly, powerfully, completely. If this story left a mark on your heart, don't scroll away just yet. Like this video if you believe in the power of presence over inheritance. Share your reflections in the comments, and hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. Stories of real healing, real strength, and the quiet victories that come when we stop waiting to be chosen, and choose ourselves instead.